Hey everyone, in today's video I want to do a quick overview of the animate layout and show you how to do some very basic animation in MODO. So first thing we're going to look at is the layout that's kind of made to work for animating, which is right here. Once we click that, we should see a window similar to this. Now right off the bat, one thing you'll notice is there's no really like sidebars available. Um, you can actually turn on your item and properties toolbars by clicking this button right here for my side panel. That will bring that up. You'll also notice that this is going to be looking through our camera instead of our perspective view. That's totally fine. This is what your final images would be anyway. You could always change this if you needed to work in a different view, or you could divide this kind of layout up. So what I can do is click on this little triangle, go to viewport controls here, and then if I was to do split horizontal, I now have two views here, and I can see my perspective in one view and my camera output in the other view. This is particularly helpful when we're like trying to animate our camera and we want to see where it's kind of moving, where it's going. So that's something else to keep in mind. All right. I'm gonna just bring this over a little bit. If you ever want to close one of these panels, you can just click on that little triangle, viewport and viewport controls and delete, and that will get rid of that. Okay, let me bring that back up. Viewport controls, split horizontal, and we'll leave it like that for now. Okay. So in addition to this side panel, we have this whole section down here that we haven't seen in any of our other views yet. So first thing you'll see here is what's called our timeline, and you'll see a bunch of numbers here from 0 to 120. Now we're going to be working in frames. Certain animation and editing programs work with timestamps. We're going to be working strictly in frames. Out of the box, MODO is set up to do 24 frames or 24 images per second of your final animation. You could see those settings under the settings button here. So it says the start and end of my animation is 0 to 120, and the current start and end is what part of that we're looking at. We'll get back to that in a second. We have a play real time button or a checkbox that's going to essentially say, even if there's a lot of stuff going on that the computer can't like keep up with in your animation when you're hitting play, try to like keep it at 24 frames per second, even if that means that the display on the computer looks a little jumpy. For most of our stuff, we'll be fine with that turned on. We have end behavior, which is after you hit play, what does the kind of moment in time do? If it's set to repeat, it will just play from the beginning over and over. If it's set to hold, it will stop at the end of your animation. And if it's set to wrap, it should also just kind of work the same way as a repeat. Time format, we're going to be sticking to frames, but we could have changed that to seconds or a certain type of time code or film code. And our frame rate is how many frames are in 1 second. And we're going to be sticking to 24, which is the film standard. We also have the like European TV and American TV standards here. But we're going to be sticking to 24 for all of our work, just so that we're kind of able to calculate stuff a little bit easier. And then outside of that menu, we just have kind of this bar here that we can click and drag across, and you'll see this white line, and that white line is called our playhead. It's the moment in time that we're looking at in our scene. Of course, there's nothing in our scene right now, so nothing's happening. We have some other buttons here that are kind of self-explanatory. So we have a play button. We have a button that goes forwards 1 frame, backwards 1 frame, to the beginning of our animation, to the end of our animation. Oh, this one right here. So you see that jumps over to 120. And we also have our move, rotate, and scale tools here. And next to them we have a button to keyframe that property. Now, what a keyframe is essentially a bit of data telling the program that this is the value at this point in time. And we'll get back to that concept in a bit. Other than that, for now, I think the layout here is a little bit more than you guys need, but you should be okay with just the stuff I've covered so far. All right. If you do want to bring up the toolbar, remember you can do that by hitting the F2 button on the keyboard, and that way I can kind of drop stuff into my scene without having to go back to MODO or model. And just so you know, if you do want to kind of work in the original MODO layout here, if you hit this time button down here, you can get your timeline here, as well as your playback buttons, and your keyframe buttons are right here. But we're going to be working in this layout just to kind of make it a little bit easier for you guys to see everything without it being compressed. All right. So first things first, let's throw in a cube. And we're just going to do a very simple animation here of moving this cube from this side to that side. All right. So first thing I always want to do is say, where does my object begin, right? I'm going to say this object's going to begin over here. I'm just going to hit the minus key to bring that transform manipulator size down a little bit. And I'm going to be animating the movement for this object. So I'm going to go to the keyframe button next to my move tool right here. And I'm going to click it. You can see the hotkey for that would be Shift W. And you'll notice that as soon as I do that, if I undo, these three circles next to my X value, my Y value, and my Z value will turn red. Okay. You'll also notice that a white line appears over here on my timeline, and that line is essentially what's going to be called my keyframe. It's telling me that there's a kind of set of data recorded for that point in time. Okay. Now if I go forwards to any point in time, so remember we said we're at 24 frames per second, so this would be 1 second. If we went to 48, that would be 2 seconds. So we'll go to 2 seconds and we'll just move this over. Okay. So by default, MODO has auto keyframing on, and that means that if you've set a keyframe, if you've saved any like data for a specific channel, like the move value, this rotate value, or the scale value, it will automatically add a new set of data when a change is made. So if I was to pull this over here, you'll notice as soon as I move it, this circle turned red when it was green. So green means, if you actually mouse over this, you'll see a bunch of options. But green means that there's a animation on this value or channel that hasn't been saved at this point in time. If we went back to 0, you'll see it's red, and it means there's animation on this channel and it has been saved at this point in time. So let's go back to 48, and as soon as we move this over, you'll notice that turns red. And now if I was to just go back to the beginning of my animation and hit play, you'll see that moves over by itself, right? MODO is going to interpolate all the frames between wherever your keyframes are and kind of make the animation happen between those 2 points. Now, if we were to look at what we have here, we can actually grab these keyframes and move them around. And this is kind of the most fundamental thing that you need to learn right out the box, is that, you know, as soon as you, or sorry, the more time that's between your keyframes, the slower the motion's going to get. The less time that's between the keyframes, the faster the motion's going to get, right? So I'm saying move from here to here in 2 seconds. If I was to say move from here to here in 1 second, it would look like it's happening faster, right? So to do that, instead of going to frame 24 and, you know, trying to change it here, I can just grab this keyframe and drag it over. Click and drag to bring that over. And now if I hit play, you're going to see that that happens faster, right? If I was to bring this all the way down to 110, go to the beginning, hit play, you see it's a very slow motion, right? Okay. So a couple of other things to note here. When we have auto keyframing on and we're using it, you'll notice that I only move the object in my X direction, my X axis, and the only kind of axis here that got a red dot is the X axis. That's because the Y and Z axes have not changed at all. If I was to move this in my Z axis here, bring this up here, you'll see that's going to turn red. But you got to keep in mind that it only knows where the object is at frame 0 and frame 48. So it's not going to actually move over and slide down. It's going to go from that point to that point, right? We never said that at any point in this animation, the object is over here. So you got to keep that in mind. And kind of a good, easy way to do that is to always, instead of just relying on your keyframes, like your automatic keyframing, it's kind of good to just press this button and that will key all three of them. So if I wanted to move over and over like that, what I would do is, let me undo a few times. So I'm right there and I'm going to click this button, and that's going to let me key those three values without having to move the object, right? I could also, instead of clicking that button, I can click on these two here, right? This button is basically saying click all three of these. Okay? And then a little bit further in time, I can bring this down here, and now it's going to go over to that point and then slide down. Okay? And even here, I would probably want to make sure I key all three of these just to be safe. And there's our first very simple animation. Okay? Nothing too fancy, nothing too special, but it's a start. Now, we can also add rotation and scale the same way. So if I wanted to say between here and here, I want to kind of rotate this object towards the camera, what I can do is at this point where I want my rotation to start, click on my rotate key all button here, key all rotation channels, and then by frame 60, let's say I want to rotate this, let's do 180 degrees. Actually, let's do 270, just have it kind of flip 3 times, and then we can hit play, watch that happen, and you can see it's kind of fast, but it does rotate, it flips. And so instead of slowing this down, maybe what I want to do is just make it rotate less. So instead of changing where that keyframe is, I'm just going to drop this down to less rotation, so 180 is what I meant to type, and now it's going to rotate once and twice. Okay, so it's instead of making the animation slower or faster, I'm just doing less of a change in my animation, right? Okay, now if we just want to kind of view this section of the animation, what we can do is use this gray bar underneath my timeline to kind of zoom in on that section. So if I see here I have the number 0 and here I have the number 120, and if I click on any of these corners, I can pull that in and you can see my timeline kind of zooms in. So if I zoom this into, let's say, starting at frame 45, and this one I'll just do up to frame 62, that should be fine. If we hit play right now, it will just loop this section of my animation. So you can kind of see it and fine tune it if I needed to. Right. And I like to actually deselect everything so I can see it without those lines and everything along the way. And I still think that's a little fast, so I'm going to slow that down a bit more. I'm going to select the object so my keyframes appear. Zoom out. And let's actually pull this over to, let's do 72. Okay. that would be 24 frame actually. Yeah, 24 frames from 48, so 72. But keep in mind that right now, when I move this over, I wasn't really sure, am I moving my rotation channels or my position channels? And in this case, I was actually moving both. But if we were to drag this up a little bit, you can see that we actually have different keyframes for position and rotation here, right? So if I was to undo that a couple of times, select my object again. So again, now my animation's ending at frame 60. You can see I have my position keyframes, my X, Y, and Z. So I can grab any of those and move them. And I have my rotation keyframes, X, Y, and Z, and I could grab those and move them as well. But if I grab these white ones up here, that's going to move all X, Y, and Z. And if I grab on the top row here, that's going to move both my position and rotation. So I'm just going to bring that over, just click and drag to frame 72. And I'm going to minimize that again because I don't really need to view those in that much detail right now. There we go. Okay, so let's go back and hit play, and I can see that's a little bit slower, right? So this is kind of the basic concept that we want to get down first before we do any more complicated animations. Just you want to get into the mindset of this workflow by saying, okay, what point in time do I want my animation to start? It might not be frame 0. You might not have anything happen till frame 25 or so, and then your animation starts. So first thing you want to do is go to the point where you want your animation to start. Let's say I'm going to do frame 0 just for this example. Then select whatever value you want to animate, whether it's move, scale, or rotate, and put a keyframe down. So you're telling the program, at this point in time, this is the value I want for this property. Okay? So I'm going to key all my scales there. And then at frame 48 here, let's say this thing has gotten a little bit smaller, 50%, right? So I can type that in. And you'll see as soon as I hit tab from after typing this in, that's going to automatically key it, just as if I had scaled it using my interactive transform manipulator. Okay, so now if we look at this from frame 0 to frame 48, that object is getting smaller. Now instead of doing that, what I'm going to do is at frame 24, I'm going to make this object bigger. So let's just select it, go to my scale tool, make it something massive like that. And then at frame 48, instead of going to 50%, I want to go to 100%. So it's back at its original size. So what I can do is instead of kind of typing all that in, I can grab this keyframe, Control C, and then at the timestamp that I want to put it, I'm going to hit Control V to paste it. Now you do want to be a little bit careful with this, right? Because right now what that could have done is it would have copied my move, scale, and rotate keys and pasted all of them here. But since I had my rotation tool turned on, it only pasted those keys. So you want to be a little bit careful with it. Whenever you make a change, and especially when you're starting out, just go back to the beginning and hit play and make sure you're getting what you wanted, right? If it's not what you wanted, just undo it and try it again. All right, so that would be how to do our basic move, scale, and rotate animations. Now I'm going to get into a couple more advanced things in the next video. However, keep in mind that any value that you have in MODO that has these dots next to it can be animated. So for example, and we'll do more of these later, but if I hit M to create a material on this, and I make the material black, I can go to that material under my shading options, select that material, and I have my color here. and the color has a dot next to it, right? So I can click that and it will make a keyframe saying at frame 0 this color is black, and I can say at frame 48 this color is also black, and at frame 24 I want this color to be, let's do we'll do a yellow. Let's go 1 1 0. Okay, and now if we look at this, it's going to go from black to yellow to black, and it will stay black for the rest of my animation. Okay. Another thing that's worth knowing right now is you can kind of preview where your objects are moving, at least. Might not help so much with scale and rotate, but at least where your objects are moving by clicking on this motion path button and adding a motion path. Now you have to do that with the object selected, but once you've done it, let me actually see it here. I don't think that actually added it. Let me try that again. There we go. So I'm not sure why it didn't add it the first time, but the motion path here will essentially show you kind of where the object is going. The green is where it's been, the blue is where it's going. And so if we were to throw in another object here, let's do a sphere. Let's animate this kind of position, sphere moving out of the way for this cube coming in. So we'll start it where it is. We'll key its position, and we're going to turn on motion path for that. Now, by this point, frame 24, we want it to kind of move out of the way. And then by frame 48, we want to move it back to where it was. I can just set my y value to 0. And you'll notice that here it can kind of get a little bit confusing because it's like it's blue, but the whole thing's a little blue because it's coming back down. So you can notice this is a different shade of blue. But if this was to kind of arc, then what we can do is, like, let's say frame 0, this object is more over here. And then at frame 48, this object is here. And you'll notice that after I change that first keyframe, the second one is going to add this curve, right? Earlier when I did this, for example, when I move this over at frame 0, it's not creating a curve that says end in the middle here, because when I went to change the object or move the object at frame 48 and 24, I didn't actually key my Z value, right? I just moved the object up. And so it doesn't know that it has to end at 0 on my Z value. And if I just tell the program, hey, start at 5.95 meters at 0, it never knows that this value changes. So you kind of have to keep track of what you're trying to animate and where you want to move stuff. If I'm at frame 48 and I say this is going to end here, then it knows that this value is going to change, and it can make this nice arc over. Okay? Can kind of make this a little bit more interesting. We can say this happens in a shorter or a quicker kind of period of time. That you can kind of see the path changing as well. The other thing I wanted to do is just like move this over like that, and then maybe at frame 48 I'm going to move this over like that. So it looks like it was kind of moving over to this point, but then it kind of has to jump over this cube. So just hit, we can actually scrub through and see what's happening here. And maybe this jump is a little too high. We can move this down and kind of take a look at what's happening here. And you can kind of adjust this based on that curve. So if you want this to happen kind of more evenly, move this over like that, something like that. And honestly, this jump would kind of more so be like a sudden jump and then land kind of quickly. So you might need to go in and fine tune that. And we'll talk about kind of better ways to do that, but for now I'm just going to kind of do it by eyeballing how this kind of curve looks. I'm going to say it's going to go something like that. Maybe. Let's move this over a little bit. So I'm going to move this here. I'm going to go to this frame and move it over and kind of make it like that. And if we hit play, you should see, so it like jumps over and lands. And it's still not the most natural thing, but you can kind of fine tune that until you're happy with it. I'm gonna actually just delete this keyframe here. Oops, maybe not. Let's go look at what's there. So at frame 31, I only have my Z, and then at frame 33, I have my Y. So I need to essentially have my Y value at frame 31. So I'm just going to set this to 0, which will automatically keyframe it. And now I should be able to delete that other keyframe. And yeah, just kind of jumps out of the way of that cube. Deselect everything, hit play. You can kind of see what's happening. All right. Okay. So for now, I want you all to just play around with these very simple animation tools of animating your move, your scale, and your rotate. Even if it's not in your actual scene, work with just simple shapes like this and practice. Let me know if you run into any issues, and we'll kind of go into fine-tuning this and different types of properties that we can animate in the next video.